Today on For the Record,
Eventually, we're all going to face death and dying.
a local psychology professor facing a terminal cancer diagnosis.
It's not something we like to think about or talk about. And there's ways that that can affect people psychologically if they haven't learned how to cope with their mortality.
He shares his message of hope.
Get up every day and I think about what are the possibilities that I have left and how can I maximize those possibilities.
And what we can all learn about facing our own mortality.
When the time comes that you do realize that you're facing death, you can die without regrets and really knowing that you've lived a full and meaningful life.
For the Record starts now. Welcome to For the Record. I'm Sheldon Ingram. It was a year ago this month that Point Park University professor Dr. Brent Robbins was diagnosed with terminal stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Just weeks ago, Pittsburgh's Action News 4 was there as Dr. Robbins shared his story with the university community, including his message of hope. Now, he and I sit down to go in depth about that message and what we can all take away from it. Dr. Brent Robbins, you are the professor of psychology at Point Park University, and I will say to our viewers that you are perhaps the most intriguing guest we will ever have on For the Record, perhaps one of the most intriguing guests anyone will have the pleasure of listening to on television because of the subject matter. We're talking about death. It's something that a lot of people think about but don't talk about.
Right.
Why has this been such a fascinating topic for you?
Well, you know, I'm a psychologist, and I went to Duquesne University, and one of the things, the emphasis at Duquesne University is in a particular approach to psychology that is very interested in how people avoid talking about death a lot of the time. You know, it's not something we like to think about or talk about, and there's ways that that can affect people psychologically if they haven't learned how to cope with their mortality. And so that I really gravitated to that, you know, as a clinician and as a researcher. And so when I started teaching, I started investigating that and doing research on that topic. And eventually, you know, it led to a book that I wrote back in 2018.
What's the basic takeaway you got from your research?
Well, I'd say the basic takeaway is it's psychologically healthier to confront mortality rather than avoid thinking about it. A lot of psychological problems that we have result from avoidance of painful or adverse emotional experiences, which makes sense, right? Because they're painful, they're not pleasant, so we don't like to have them. But often what happens when we avoid things is it takes psychological energy, right, to avoid thinking about something that's coming to our mind. And we're much better off actually facing the things that are painful for us. They become more bearable when we're able to face them and talk about them and get support and social support as well as other forms of support. So
you brought this to bear recently in a recent talk that you had for an audience dealing with existential psychotherapy,
right,
and its application for working with people who have a terminal illness or have a life-threatening illness.
Yes.
And this is brought about by your own situation.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, you know, when I was in the hospital, I'll tell you a little bit of the story about how that happened. I was at Mercy Hospital. I'd gone there because my doctor said, you know, I needed to get a CT scan because of the symptoms that I was having. You know, I was a bit jaundiced and had some other symptoms. And when I was there, I was laying at a gurney, you know, at a very busy emergency room hospital. And I think it was an intern, he was a young doctor, you know, came up to me and told me the results of my CT scan, and my wife was there with me. And over the course of the next few days, I learned that not only did I have a pancreatic tumor, but that it had metastasized to my liver. And that is what's called stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And when I met with my oncologist, who is a fantastic oncologist because she's very straightforward, she doesn't mince words, right? She gets straight to the issue, which I really appreciate because then I feel like I always trust that I'm getting the best information from her. And she was very straightforward. She said, stage 4 pancreatic cancer has no cure. What we can offer you is palliative care as chemotherapy. There may be some options for experimental treatments, either right away or down the road. But generally, what we have is a palliative process that will ultimately terminate in death.
So now, you put in years of research on death,
Right.
and the psychoanalysis aspect of death. Now it comes to bear with your own situation. What was your reaction when you received that diagnosis from your oncologist?
Yeah, well,
knowing that you put in all this legwork years ahead of time.
Right. That's why I wanted to give you that context, because when I was meeting with her, I don't meet with people all the time and tell them the news initially about that they're going to die. I work with clients who maybe have known for a while and helping them with their anticipatory grief and coping with death and dying. So it's interesting to be in that situation where I was confronting my own mortality with this diagnosis. And my reaction was to ask a lot of questions, was my first reaction. Like, what are my treatment options? Am I still going to be able to work? What does the end stage look like? I really was looking for information that would help me plan what I needed to do next, right, to set up my life, because I knew that this was obviously going to radically change my life, and I wanted to know, well, what is that going to look like? What's the picture of the next year or two? And she laid it out for me. And then in the course of that conversation, she looked at me and she had a peculiar look on her face, and she said, "You're a highly evolved person," is what she said, which caught me off guard because I was just being natural, and she said, but apparently people don't usually react that way, that usually they get very upset and emotional.
Did you at any time have a feeling of fear, loneliness after receiving that diagnosis?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, it's anybody who's human, who finds out that they have this kind of cancer and they're facing a terminal illness where there's no cure, is going to be feeling fear, anxiety. I think for me it was a real struggle, because I want to be hopeful. On the one hand, I want to hope that maybe there's some treatment that's going to come along, and maybe I'll be the exception. Like there's a very small percentage of people who live, more than 5 years. Maybe I'll be one of those people. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I don't want to be, like I said, I want to face reality. I don't want to delude myself. I want to make sure that I'm being sober and looking reality squarely in the face, partly because I know that that's actually better for you emotionally when you face things rather than avoid them.
In your studies, did you look into the final moments of life before someone takes that final breath?
Yes, I have looked at that.
That whole process and what it's like and how you might envision it for yourself.
Right. Yeah, I think, for me, I'm a Catholic, so I have a religious perspective as well as a scientific perspective. And so I think for me, I sort of combine those two into a way, my understanding of what things would be like in the final moments. I think I know, from an empirical perspective, from a science perspective, we do know that people, there's a range. Some people are very lucid and they know what's happening in their final moments. Other people are more unconscious. Sometimes that depends on how much pain medication that they're on, for example. Or like in my case, people with pancreatic cancer, when their liver starts to fail, they can get a buildup of ammonia that can make them confused. And I don't like that idea of being confused. I would like to be lucid and aware, in my final moments if that's possible. But I don't really have control over that. Mm-hmm. It's going to be what it's going to be. But if I am lucid, I'd like to be in a very kind of use it as a opportunity to really be spiritually attuned, to my Creator and be ready, to meet Him when I get to the other side, is my hope.
Still ahead on For the Record.
If you think about it, every day that you get up in the morning, that could be your day. That could be the day that you die.
The message for all of us about living life to the fullest. Welcome back to For the Record. Let's go back now to my conversation with Dr. Brent Robbins as we discuss facing mortality amid his own terminal cancer diagnosis. What is your message to those who are listening to you talk about death, your own research, and then your own diagnosis? What should we take from this?
Yeah, well, there's a number of things I think that I've learned along the way that are important that I'll mention. One of my consistent messages that I want to put across is that when people are facing death, what's interesting is it's not that different than when you don't have a terminal illness, when you're living your life, right? If you think about it, every day that you get up in the morning, that could be your day. That could be the day that you die. You could get hit by a car. You could have a cardiac arrest. You could, all kinds of things. You can have an aneurysm, you know?
In my conversations with folks, just random conversations, not necessarily on your topic, I tend to say that each of us has our own expiration date.
That's right.
We don't know when it is.
That's right.
But to that end, you said this in your recent address, and then if you really think about it, we're all, terminal, so to speak.
Right.
Eventually, we're all going to face death and dying for somebody we love.
That's right. Right. So since we're all in that situation, suddenly facing a terminal illness is not that different than it was before I faced the terminal illness, in the sense that I get up every day and I don't know if that's going to be the day that I die or exactly how much. In fact, my doctors won't even tell me a prognosis because they say people are so different and there's so much individual variation. But whether you have a terminal illness diagnosis or you don't, we're faced with a limited number of possibilities for our lives. There are things that we're striving to achieve that we care about. And then there are things that, we have to give up, right? There are things, we have to make choices. And when you become more aware of your limited time, then you have to prioritize. You have to think about what do I really value in life? What's really important to me? And I think a lot of people don't have this conversation with themselves or with their family members until it's too late. Like they get to a point where they're really out of time, and now they're dealing with regret. And so it's very important for me not to be in a position where I'm feeling regret for the things that I didn't do. So I get up every day and I think about what are the possibilities that I have left, and how can I maximize those possibilities?
In terms of living life.
In terms of living life.
Living your best life.
Living my best life.
And what is that for you?
Well, for me, I would go at there's sort of a priority of values for me. It's like God's like number one, my wife is number two, my kids and my parents, immediate family, extended family, my friends, and then work, which for me is a vocation. It has to do with two things, really: teaching, scholarship, and to some extent clinical work, which I'm doing less of now since I got sick, but mostly teaching and doing scholarship. And so those are the priorities, and ultimately those, if I'm keeping those priorities at, if I'm managing those priorities appropriately, then my life goes well. When I'm not managing them appropriately, they do not go well.
And so in your conversations with others, they listen to, they read your book, they listen to you speak with public audiences. What are folks saying to you in private conversations?
Yeah, well, the big thing that people come to me with when I talk about this publicly is I get a very consistent response that people feel a deep gratitude for their life. Gratitude is a common theme. And I think it's because it goes along with what I just said, that people realize how precious life is, that life doesn't go on forever, that there's a limit to life. And that's something that everybody we know that intellectually, but in a deep emotional way, people don't really think about that because it's difficult. It's a difficult thing to face. But when people do face it, when people are listening to me giving a talk, what happens is they don't get sad necessarily, although I do see a lot of tears, right? Because their own losses come forward for them, the people that they've lost, anticipating the loss of people that they love. But what ends up coming out of that is a kind of gratitude. And then from that gratitude, wanting to thank maybe the people that have been instrumental in their lives in some way or that really are important to them, because they know that they don't know how much time they have with that person, those people that they love.
And are you encouraging people to have, well, two questions. Do people sometimes take on a different temperament towards life? Might alter how easily they're frustrated or things of that nature, or just doing things that they've never done before?
Yeah, I think it can have a lot of impact. I think one of the big things that I really stress that I think I've learned is really important is like when you come right down to it, when you're facing death in a really powerful way, like I think you realize how important the relationships are in your life, how important love is, that there are people you care for and there are people that care for you and that you nurture, you're there for each other. Like everything else kind of becomes, you realize is just secondary to that from my experience. And so I find that that's very true, that when I talk to people, like they really find it important to, like think about those ruptures in relationships they have with people they care about. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a child, maybe it's a friend, maybe they've done somebody wrong and they haven't asked for forgiveness for that. Like those, it's important to get those things right, because at some point it might be too late,
Still ahead.
I have a hope, that is a spiritual hope, that there's things in this world that go beyond what we can understand.
How Dr. Brent Robbins looks at both faith and science as he reflects on his mortality. Welcome back to For the Record. Some thoughts now from Dr. Brent Robbins on how he's embracing his mortality. You've made it very clear that you have embraced your immortality and dealing with the stage 4 pancreatic cancer that you have. But at the same time, you're soliciting prayers.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Yeah, I have my prayer warriors, as they call them, and there's a lot of them. They're on social media, and they're friends that I know, and when I have important things that are coming up, CT scan, I ask for those prayers. The reason I do that is because I have a hope, that is a spiritual hope, that there's things in this world that go beyond what we can understand purely medically, that miracles can happen. And I had a wonderful conversation with a friend of mine who's an agnostic, my friend Bob McInerney, he's in the office next door to me, but he's retiring this year, so he had to empty his office. It was so sad seeing him leave. But Bob he's in Seattle, Washington. But we had many conversations over the years about faith. It was one of our favorite conversations. He was agnostic and me being someone who's Catholic. But we had a deep respect and love for one another despite our differences of opinion about that. And he was one of the first people I told about my diagnosis. I took him out. We went out to dinner. And in the course of that, he told me that at the end of our conversation, he told me that while he was agnostic, he wasn't adverse to hope and miracles. Mm-hmm. And he was going to hope that I was going to have a miracle.
At this talk that you gave recently, you say that you're hopeful for supernatural miracle, that it can take place, that I hope that I don't want to give up on hope.
Right.
And hope for a miracle, that miracles sometimes do happen in the supernatural. So then, you have your scientific belief and medicine and so forth, and then you have your belief, your faith belief there.
Right. And I am doing all the medicine.
So, so you're trying to combine both.
That's right. I don't think it's an either or at all. I think sometimes God can work through the doctor's hands, to save people. And then sometimes God chooses to intervene in supernatural ways, and I really believe that. I've been going to a healing mass. It's a place called St. Charbel Spiritual Center in Brookline, and a friend of mine suggested I go to the service. It's a beautiful service where you get anointed by oil and they do a healing service. And it's interesting, there's a correlation. I mean, it's too early to say, if there's a miracle here. But when I started going, I did see some improvements in my numbers.
So in addition to the supernatural healing that you speak of, your prayer requests also center on perhaps a miracle with medicine.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking for opportunities to get involved in experimental trials. There's wonderful, the Hillman Medical Center has a number of trials I haven't qualified for because the biology of my tumor wasn't quite right. But there's a meeting that I have set up after my next CT scan. So once this chemotherapy that I'm on, if that doesn't work, then there's a possibility for an immunotherapy trial that I can get on board with, and I'm on the waiting list for right now. And I think immunotherapy is, in itself a kind of scientific miracle. There's people for whom there was no cure, who have been able to avail themselves of experimental treatments, and they go from having a tumor that was incurable to being no evidence of tumor at all, no evidence of any cancer. And there's people it doesn't work for, but I figured why not go for it? If the option is to die, I'd rather take a risk, even if there's potential for side effects, because what do I have to lose?
And just ahead, in 2 minutes, Dr. Brent Robbins shares a final thought with me. Welcome back to For the Record. As we wrap up this half hour, I asked Dr. Brent Robbins for a last word. Take a listen. Any last thought?
Well, my only last thought would be that I would really encourage everybody to just sort of do a little bit of meditation. There's an old tradition that goes way back, thousands of years. It's called memento mori. It means remember you will die. And if you keep that part of your routine, remember that you'll die, and then you'll really think about what's really important in your life and what to prioritize. And the things that are kind of trivial and that don't really matter, that often take up our lives, maybe you'll do a little bit less of that and prioritize things that really matter, so that when the time comes that you do realize that you're facing death, you can die without regrets and really knowing that you've lived a full and meaningful life.
And Dr. Robbins tells us he continues to teach at Point Park while he undergoes his treatment. That's all for this week's edition of For the Record. We'll see you next Sunday morning at 11 a.m.